Hello and welcome to the bike show from eastern Bavaria, very near the Czechia border, where it's beginning to cloud up, but thankfully I've already filmed the bike for the test in this episode, which also features Fire It Up and a story on radar. First though, I ride a bike that I first experienced a year ago, and although it hasn't been updated as such, that first test I did was interrupted by Germany's version of a monsoon, and so I never really got to do the things with it that I wanted to. The thing is, recently I've been going through more of the sort of evaluation that you would do rather than as a journalist, because I've been on the verge of buying myself a new bike to use here in Europe. I sold the 2016 S1000R I had in South Africa, and I decided I wanted a new bike here. First I had to set myself a budget, which ended up being 10 to 11,000 euros, or about 170 to 190,000 rand. Then, like many of you who will have approached the challenge of buying your only bike and deciding how much heart and how much head will determine what you end up getting, I tried to apply some logic to the task. Given my job, I'm in the enviable position of being able to ride a pretty constant stream of new bikes, so if it's purely pleasure, then I would struggle to justify the extra expense of owning my own bike. But having travelled around Europe quite extensively this last couple of years, it has reminded me frequently about how incredibly rich it is in amazing biking roads. There are literally thousands of them spread across 30 or more countries, and whenever I've been travelling to the next bike show story in my van, I've often stumbled across some amazing new road and wanted to get a bike out and ride it and film a story on it for our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, more often than not, I don't have a bike with me, and so I decided to invest in a tow bar and a trailer for the van, which I've now got. And the next thing is, obviously, to get a bike. Filming stories about roads means a bike that obviously handles well and is basically fun to ride. I didn't want to sacrifice that. It's a long time since I treated myself to a new bike, so I decided that I'd see what I could get for my money. My personal favourites have always been naked sport bikes, and so I went to a dealer and grabbed myself a demo ride on Yamaha's new MT-09. 11,000 euros gets me the SP version, but I rode the standard model and realised it was so improved over the previous effort that I didn't need the SP, and so 9,500 euros would do the trick. Job done. Except it wasn't, because the colour I wanted wasn't available and wouldn't be for some months, because, rumour has it, the stock was all trapped on the Ever Given container ship, the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal and then impounded. I did it a bit too long, and when I eventually decided I could in fact live with the blue and silver one, all the stock was gone and you couldn't get a MT-09 of any colour for love or money in France. So the next alternative to suggest itself was Triumph's 765 Street Triple R. I absolutely love the RS version of this bike. I've had two 675 Street Triple Rs in the past, and so I know the general package pretty well. I don't like the fact that the R has slightly lesser suspension and brakes and a more basic dash than the RS, and I really don't appreciate the fact that the engine has also been dumbed down by half a dozen horsepower or so. And then KTM released the 890 Duke, the standard version of the R that I tested last year and later decided was my bike of the year 2020. That's more like it, I thought, and then I rode it. And like the Triumph, it has had all its components, including the engine, dumbed down just a bit too much for my liking. And so I went off that idea as well. That's a really cool aspect of Yamaha's MT-09. The engine spec is identical between the standard and the SP versions, as are the brakes and dash, so you don't feel quite so handicapped by going for the base model. At this point I gave up on the idea of a new bike and decided a second-hand bike of about 1 to 1.5 years vintage would do the trick, because then I could choose between KTM's Duke 890R and Triumph's Street Triple RS. After much more dithering, I finally opted to hunt down a KTM 890R, and while looking through all the ads and realising I'd actually have to spend near 11,500 or 12,000 euros, I noticed BMW's F900R was available, also a year or so old, for about 10,000 euros with all the extras. And there are a lot of extras on a fully spec'd BMW. Unlike you, I don't have to consult all the online and YouTube road tests because, well, you know, I've ridden them all. But when I consulted my own onboard database, it was just a little fuzzy on the F900R because of that monsoon thing. So I've got it again. I wanted to see whether this bike might fit my needs, save me some money in the process, and still manage to put a grin on my face when I'm riding some of the best roads on the planet. From the riding point of view, it's a much more relaxed proposition than all those other bikes I've been talking about. It's a parallel twin, but it's a good 10 horsepower or more down on those bikes. But it's not short of torque, and so that's the way you've got to ride it, really. There's loads of useful grunt from way down in the rev range. And so, if you ride it using that, it's actually pretty rapid. And it's rapid in an easygoing manner. It's easy to go fast, if you know what I mean. It's just if you want to go a little bit harder and start to use all the revs, it begins to feel a little bit strained, like it's not really enjoying it. So, to have fun, both you and the bike need to be at their optimum, really up to about 70%. Any more than that and it all just feels a bit too much like hard work. There's a variety of riding modes, but I just leave it in the sportiest setting, which is Dynamic Pro. The throttle response is sharper, but in no way unmanageable, so even in the rain I haven't felt the need to swap to a softer setting. And then there's the Gear Shift Assist Pro, or whatever it is. Basically the two ways quick shifter up and down. And on this bike it's, well actually it's rubbish. I only use it about 5% of the time, and then only at really high RPM, because at all other times it's just too notchy, too brutal. You're better off doing it the old-fashioned way, the gear changes, and then actually it's not a bad gearbox at all. But there's also another problem, and it just shows its head very occasionally, and it's the clutch. When you pull off from standstill, suddenly, sometimes out of the blue, it'll just slip and then grab and lurch, and it's horrible. Makes you look like a complete novice. It's not good. Not good at all. The riding position is actually quite sporty. There's not a huge amount of room for your legs, and you are leaned forward a decent amount, but I like it overall. It's a compromise between feeling connected for the sport riding and being sort of normal enough that you can actually cover some distance. And while I'm here, I might as well mention that at 220 kilos, give or take a kilo depending on what equipment level you specify, it's not exactly light, and you do feel it's a bit of a lump when you want to move it around at standstill. However, when you're on the move, which is the important bit after all, it doesn't live up to those porky specs. In fact, it handles quite well, quite agile, and it's pretty confidence inspiring, which isn't a given considering it has a totally unadjustable front end. The semi-active suspension at the rear, and it gives, in Dynamic Pro at least, a satisfyingly firm ride. In fact, the forks give a pretty firm ride as well, so overall it's a pretty competent sporting package, I have to say. The brakes are good, and the cornering ABS isn't too intrusive and backs itself off in Dynamic Pro. The same can be said of the traction control, and there's even adjustable engine braking. These are all features you'd expect to find on a much more expensive bike. It looks pretty good too, with an aggressive hunched up at the front kind of stance and a clean rear end, thanks in large part to the passenger foot pegs that don't have the traditional rear hangers. The exhaust is neat too. It's especially fetching in the red and silver combo. This blue's a bit restrained for me. What does stand out though on a bike of this class is the Tft Screen, which is large and colourful and, well, excellent in every way really. The range of info is fantastic, including the sporty display that will record your maximum brake input and traction control activation, and also show you your maximum lean angle on either side. And there's the keyless ignition, which I love, and heated grips and cruise control and intuitive controls for all the other functions. This stuff is just so far ahead of the KTM, Triumph and Yamaha in terms of quality and usability. And I haven't even mentioned the way it integrates with the free BMW app to record your rides and provide you with turn-by-turn navigation on the screen. Simply bloody brilliant it is. All of these details go to enhancing the ownership proposition significantly, and would certainly go a long way to help me overlook the dodgy up and down quick shifter and the comparative lack of horsepower. The question is, after revisiting the BMW, which of the contenders am I going to buy? It has been a difficult process, that's for sure. And along the way, I've gone from wanting to spend a maximum of €10,000 to being prepared to pay $12,000 for the right bike. The MT-09 and this bike, the BMW, have shown me that actually I don't need to spend €12,000. 10,000 is plenty. So when I get back from these travels I'm on for the next few months, I'm going to spend 12,000 on a second-hand 3-year-old Aprilia Tuono V4 1100 RR. My heart got in the way of my head, and that's what biking passion is all about, isn't it?